Hello, everyone. I'm Tolde Stefanos from Erisat's Power of One program. Dr. Timnit Gebru is my guest today. Dr. Timnit is a trailblazer. She is in the news a lot. Stanford PhD, specializing in artificial intelligence, worked in the who is who of high tech, Apple, Microsoft, Google. Now she is the founder and executive director of the Distributed Artificial Intelligence Research Institute, the DARE Institute for short. Dr. Timnit has already given a few interviews in Erisat in Tigrinya, and the Erisat team thought there is a segment of our population who might not understand or speak Tigrinya, and for their benefit, we are doing this in English. And for the parents who are listening, this is a good opportunity to introduce your young ones with Dr. Timnit. So thank you, Dr. Timnit, and welcome. So to just dive in, according to the website of the DARE Institute, preventing harms embedded in AI technology is one of its objectives. What are the harms that concern you the most, and what is the Institute planning to do to mitigate those?
I think there are a number of them. At the root of it is basically the fact that when you look at what AI is used for across the board, whether it is, in places like where we come from or in highly rich countries, it's being mostly used to subjugate citizens. It's not being used to feed the poor or figure out how to make our society more equal. It's being used for the exact opposite. And so when I try to raise awareness about that in large companies like Google, it's very difficult. So for example, want to give you an example, you were talking about Tigrinya. I was seeing the escalating conflict in Ethiopia, especially in Tigray, that was starting, in November, like a month or so before I was fired, and I was seeing all of the social media stuff, and I was very worried about it. And one of the things I said at Google was that they don't even, it's not even on their radar. It's not considered important for them. So I actually tried to get them for one of the priorities in quote unquote responsible AI to be language technology analyzing non-English languages and non-Western languages such as Tigrinya or Tigra or any of the languages that are spoken in Eritrea and Ethiopia and other parts of Africa. And the same guy who was involved in telling me to retract my paper, one of my papers that I wrote, analyzing the harms of a type of language technology on members of marginalized groups or non-dominant groups, said that I disagree with this because we're putting enough resources on international languages. And I said, what do you mean by international? I literally wrote, I'm an African refugee and none of my native tongue is not even involved, So, and of course, then I was fired. So it became clear to me that instead of just always trying to convince people in power and always trying to fight, which is draining, and which it's unclear how much progress you make doing that, I would rather try to give more opportunities for the people who are usually disempowered to realize their vision of what we should do instead. And so that's what I'm hoping to do with DARE. So for example, our first fellow, she lives in, she's South African, she lives in South Africa. And we were working on a project for a very long time, like years, on using AI, satellite imagery, to analyze the legacy of spatial apartheid. So, right, like apartheid in South Africa, by law, they said that non-European populations have to live in specific places and they have lower budget than, you know, European populations. Basically the same as the Italians when, you know, we don't learn, I feel, as much about what was going on in Eritrea when the Italians were taking over, colonizing. So anyways, so this project, for many other people, it might not seem important or novel, and this a woman we're working with, she wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't hire her at Apple, they wouldn't give her an internship at Google or anything, right? But we believe that this is an important project, so we can advance it. In addition to that, for instance, I believe that in order for AI to be beneficial, it should include its development should include people who are highly impacted by AI. So one of the groups of people who are highly negatively impacted by artificial intelligence are refugees. So this should be very, this might be interesting to this audience because obviously, as we know, Eritreans make up one of the highest number of refugees in the world. And as they're trying to migrate, they're going through all of this surveillance, right? So for instance, the EU utilizes this militaristic approach, drones, aerial surveillance, biometrics, etc. At the US-Mexico border is the same thing. So part of what I feel we need to do in order to ensure that AI is actually developed in a way that's not harming people is have these voices, right? Have these voices involved in its development. So one of the things we're doing is we are hoping to not only involve those voices in our research projects, but also try to craft fellowship programs that are directly directed to these various communities. So for instance, one of the people helping us do that we're working with, collaborating with, is Meronis Stefanos, right? Who is a longtime Eritrean refugee advocate. So these are the kinds of ways in which we're hoping to shape our institute.
Yeah. Obviously, the challenges, you know, are huge. I mean, these guys have the people that you're taking on, the power that you're taking on, have more money than God. So, what gives you the energy, the passion, and the confidence to take this on?
I think that sometimes when you really don't think about it, when you don't sit down and say, oh my God, what am I doing? Who am I taking on? And what power do they have? You can just go on, right? And to me, it's before I spoke up against Google, I tried being quiet many times, right? So I've been in this industry for 18 years. And I've had so many different experiences. I worked at all the not all, but many of the large tech companies. I know many of the, you know, very famous people in the field of AI, the equivalent of the Nobel Prize winners in AI. I go to those conferences. So I've tried many different approaches, and I have some successful, some not successful. And keeping quiet, it has a cost. It not only has a cost of not changing things. So for instance, when I spoke up about Google, a lot of other people also started speaking up about their experiences. It gave them a little bit more protection. And I think that I believe that at the end of the day, and this is something I really truly believe, it is human beings, it's people who have power. The money talks, as they say, but it's because we decide as human beings that that's the society that we're living in. We could decide otherwise, right? So I believe in the phrase more power to the people. So that's, for me, that's why I spend a lot of time, you know, with people. There are many kind of invitations and things I had declined with, like, you know, much more powerful people, because if I spend my time always, you know, mingling with the really highly powerful people, my point of view is not going to be, you know, aligned with the people with less power, but people with more power. So at the end of the day, it's because I do believe in the phrase "power to the people," and I have tried many different other ways, and there is a huge cost to speaking up. But I think that, as people say, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Yep.
I believe this in all scenarios, not just the tech scenario, but when you're talking about autocrats and human rights violations, the first most important thing to do is bring the facts to light. I don't think you can make any progress without doing that. So that's what I'm hoping to do here too.
Excellent, excellent. So just to pick up on the inequality point that you brought up earlier, I think the wealth and technology gap is getting wider, even within populations in developed countries. It's even worse when you take developed and developing countries. So is there trying to use technology to solve the problems that technology has created?
Well, I don't believe so. One of our statements says AI is not inevitable. So that what you just mentioned would fall under, for me, tech solutionism, which is assuming that all of society's problems can be solved by technology, and I don't subscribe to that. I also don't subscribe to the notion that technology is just 100% bad, so we should never have technology, right? There's so my point of view is that there may be applications for technology that help people, and in order to find those applications, the people developing it and involved in it should be the people that you're hoping to help, and so that they can figure out, they know their needs, and they can work on technology that helps them. But at the same time, not everything can be solved by technology, and technology can make things worse. And we want I want to be able to also bring to light how technology is making things worse, and we should be able to say no, right? We found out that one person said, we found that asbestos was bad, so there was a movement to ban it, right? It's not inevitable. So when you find out that something is bad, you should be able to say, no, we don't want this anymore. But it's much easier to not develop it in the first place than have it developed and proliferated, and then, trying to take it back. So I certainly don't subscribe to the notion that we should use technology to solve the issues of technology, but you would be surprised by how many respected AI researchers say that. Like, for instance, I was in a panel, or I watched a panel or some sort where this woman was literally suggesting that we should automate fairness in some way, and I was just thinking, no. so I subscribe to the point that human beings create technology, period, and we should decide what to create and what not to create.
Some of the helpful technologies could be, for example, technology has made the number of jobs that you can do remotely more and more. So that can be a positive one, because African professionals now can probably work anywhere around the world without having to leave their home countries, which means their incomes will stay local, helping the local economies. Likewise, diaspora Africans can probably also participate in the development of Africa without having to leave their adopted countries. So how well does this integrate with, or help what DARE is trying to do?
Yeah, this is exactly what we're doing with DARE. So what you said is precisely why it's called the Distributed AI Research Institute. So when I was thinking about what was the most important thing in my view in creating such an institute, the distributed aspect of it was really important, because this is exactly what you said. So we've been involved, when I was working with Black and AI, in bringing researchers to various conferences, etc. And we always have these visa issues. It's such a headache. We have to fight, and it's on the news, and we have to call all the embassies and show it to, like, we all know, we know what it's like. And so I didn't want to contribute to the brain drain. What I wanted to do was, I didn't want to give more power to Silicon Valley. That's really not, that this community has way too much power. So what I wanted to do was encourage people to stay where they are if they're safe, and if that's what they want to do, and give them opportunities that are available to many other people. And so then when they're, if they make some money, the community that they're going to support will be their local community, their local economy, their local collaborators, whatever it is, and maybe they can go off to start something different in their local communities. And so this is a central concept of DARE as well.
Like you mentioned earlier, technology is not 100% bad. So what aspects of artificial intelligence are most likely to benefit developing nations like most of Africa is?
I think I've been thinking very much about this, and I've come to the conclusion that it's like for them to benefit developing nations, they have to be created from the very beginning with that goal in mind. The problem right now is when you look at the history of artificial intelligence, it's always developed with war in mind, always. And this is true for a lot of technology too. But for instance, when you look at the history of machine translation, the US, wanted to understand what Russians were saying and things like that during the Cold War era. And that's kind of how it started. And so and then what happens is the tenets, the main specialties that emerge, even when they feel abstract, end up advancing that specific goal of centralized power. So I think decentralized power is very important. So anytime you have an imbalance, we're seeing this right now, for instance, with social media, right? It's not necessarily AI, but there's lots of AI that they use for content moderation and things like that. With social media in the beginning, a lot of people said it would be, it's a great thing because people used it in the Arab Spring, etc. But what happened later is that the autocrats, the powerful, started understanding how to use it. And now if you really analyze social media use, it is unbelievable how sophisticated all of these different superpowers, the sophisticated ways in which they have different agents, humans and troll farms, etc., coordinating to use social media, right? So unless it's created from day one with analyzing, how to prevent that from happening and how to make sure that it's giving more power to the powerless, any kind of thing you think about is going to end up, kind of having more of a gap. So even cars, when you look at cars, I mean, in the United States, what would have been a much better thing to have is lots of public transportation, because poor people could have jobs and so you wouldn't have this spread, this urban sprawl, etc. But what happened is that a lot of car companies were sabotaging and climate change. You wouldn't have such a huge carbon footprint. But what happened is a lot of the car companies were sabotaging all of these, public transportation projects and the railroad, etc., etc. So you ended up with this kind of sprawl, right? So my point is that anything we develop, it has to come with the goal of the end goal of advancing the kind of equity rather than assuming, oh, we're going to first, build this technology and then it's going to be redistributed to everybody else. That never works. Right. So that's my point of view on AI too.
Yeah, I think you mentioned 2 points that are scary: war and efficient dictatorships. So in war, with drones and face recognition and miniaturized drones, who knows what's going to happen.
Look at drones
next.
in Ethiopia.
Yeah,
people are starving.
Yeah.
40 the Somali region is having a drought that is hasn't been seen in 40 years. In Tigray, they're starving. In Oromia, they're starving. And this country has the money to buy drones to bomb its own citizens. You could use drones to deliver medicine, to send food to people. But that's not what's happening. And that's because there's an interplay between the technology and the society that it's in. And as long as in science and technology studies, it's called a socio-technical system. You cannot study the effect of technology without analyzing the society that it's in and the political and geopolitical landscape that it's in.
So what can Africans study and do to help decentralize this power? The reason why I'm asking that question is you had a successful coding program in Ethiopia where you found really bright young students who ended up going to the best universities in the US.
Yeah.
So how can we find those high potential youngsters before war, poverty or other calamities claim them, So like you said, this power needs to be distributed, and we need the education and the involvement to help us get there. So how can we get more of what you had with your coding program?
Well, there are so many talented students and people everywhere, and they just don't have the opportunity to realize their potential. And so I've also seen this with Black and AI. We have so with Addis Coder, we had a yearly program that I don't know when it's gonna go back in Addis, but there's high school students, and with Black and AI, there is this graduate. We're just hoping to provide the opportunities, right? Show, disseminate the information, because a lot of people don't know that these opportunities exist, and then also help them get these fellowships or internships or jobs or get into schools. So there is the academic. So I'm no longer, in the leadership team of Black AI, but there's this program, this academic positions kind of a program that pairs students who are hoping to apply to academic positions or graduate school with people who will help them do it. And there's also, people are working on a startup, entrepreneurship program to help people who want to create their own startups, them with other organizations. But at the end of the day, for me, anything you do has to be rooted in the needs of people, and you won't know that unless you're connected with the people. So if you're someone in the diaspora who want to support people, you have to be connected with the people, and then you'll know, what their problems are and how you can support. So with collaborations, for instance, I think there can be a lot of collaborations with academics based in the diaspora and academics based, in the continent, and that would elevate the voices of the people based in the continent. But another thing I want to say is it's not enough to just do that, because there are a lot of structural barriers. So we work many times on addressing those structural barriers, such as, for instance, the visa issues, or the fact that many of these conferences, academic conferences, where people have opportunities and they get to gain more visibility and collaboration, are held outside of the African continent, and it's just so hard to convince them to hold it in an African country such that many other Africans can go and participate. So we have to work on those structural barriers too. And the third thing I would say is that one thing I noticed when I'm teaching is that people want to emulate what's being done in Silicon Valley, or they want to emulate you know, what's happening in the West. And I feel like it's very important to, you know, incorporate your indigenous knowledge and indigenous history and knowledge and culture and understanding in ways so that, because the trajectory that technology has been having right now is not a good one, in my view. You know, we're having a climate catastrophe, we're having a centralization of power, etc. So there are many so emulating what's happening elsewhere is not necessarily, you know, the best thing to do. I think I would encourage people to be creative, to think about their local problems and work on solutions. So for instance, when I was teaching in Rwanda, I was teaching this class, and I was trying to encourage them to think about their local problems. So we had this data set of cassava leaves, because cassava is a crop eaten by 80% of, you know, sub-Saharan Africa, and it's a very important food security crop, and especially with climate change, it's very, very important to figure out, you know, high yield cassava, right? So my collaborators were working on an app. They had an app that a phone, because a lot of farmers had a phone, they could use with their phone to identify diseased cassava leaves versus not. And so we had this Kaggle competition as a project in the class, so that students could, you know, work on the best models that identified the disease and things like that. And that's kind of like, you know, thinking about your local problem and how to work on AI that helps with that local problem. And so I think that is a very important part of changing the trajectory of technology right now.
Just to pick up on the structural barriers you mentioned, often it's the policymakers that are lagging behind in setting the right national priorities to help, you know, accelerate the kinds of things that you mentioned. How can their work with policymakers to align them with the vision that you have?
I think that one of them is, for instance, with this South Africa, with this you know, project in South Africa, one of the things we noticed is that the South African government doesn't label townships during this Spatial Apartheid Act. And so if you want to analyze whether post-apartheid the livelihoods of Black people have actually gotten better, or how, or what's going on with the wealth gap, etc., you have to label the townships and you have to analyze how they change over time. So one of the arguments we're going to be making in a series of, you know, works and blog posts and stuff is how, through our work using, you know, AI, we have come to the conclusion that it's crucial to label the townships rather than just lump them with other kind of residences. So hopefully this argument could then help the policymakers, right, and the government to change that. So this is just not an AI policy change, but like a societal policy change. The flip side of that is, for instance, in my prior works, we showed that, you know, tools like face recognition tools, automated facial analysis tools had a high error rate on darker skinned women rather than lighter skinned men. So that has led to a lot of policy changes at many different levels, including, you know, the EU that's debating that has the AI Act. And for instance, other works such as, you know, showing, I have this paper with collaborators called Data Sheets on for data sets, where we're saying that, you know, you shouldn't move fast and break things, as they say. You should be very slow and deliberate and, you know, kind of figure out what kinds of things you have to consider when you're gathering data sets. So document your data sets, document your models, test them, etc. That takes time and resources. So some of these suggestions have been incorporated into legislation. And so at the end of the day, what I think is that a lot of companies don't want to do any of this stuff because it requires more resources and more money. And if you want to convince the extent of the harm to policymakers and help them kind of figure out what kind of regulation should be in place, you can do research that does that and communicates it in a way that is understandable to the different stakeholders. So that's kind of what I hope to continue doing with our institute too.
Okay. There is a non-profit organization based in the US. Obviously, we can all, support it by donating money, as we should. But even prominent personalities like the late Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk and others have expressed serious misgivings about AI like you have. How else besides donating money can people who share your concerns help your institute?
Elon Musk is not someone I would consider to be either qualified nor someone who should be commenting on having misgivings about AI, because he is one of the biggest problems that we're seeing in society. So I can go off, I can say a lot about that. But one of the ways is that, again, we should not give prominent voices to these billionaires who are actually causing a lot of harm. So like including Elon Musk. But I think in terms of supporting DARE, I want DARE to support this community. So that's what I want to do. I probably, once we have especially fellowships for refugees and other things, people maybe can contribute to donate to that specific program. People could contribute to programs, generally DARE, but programs that they find, they feel strongly about. So I guess we'll have more information about that in the coming months as we develop our institute. But, I think that people can just get more educated on some of the ways in which AI can harm their communities. You can follow us on Twitter to have updates. And there are other similar organizations that people can follow. And hopefully somebody else can also pop up and create something similar to DARE. Because I don't believe in centralized power and taking over the world. I believe in people replicating, having smaller things, distributed approach, right? And replicating this approach in their own context.
Any specific advice for young students who are usually impatient, to bring about change? How can what can you tell them? What do they need to study? What do they need to focus on in terms of developing their critical thinking skills?
Well, I believe that the young students are very much justified in their impatience to bring about change, because the prior generation has left them with a world that is, that's having so many problems, and that's
Absolutely.
becoming more and more unlivable for these young people. So they have every right to criticize the prior generation that left them with that. So I would say that, I believe in that generation, and kudos to them, and that they should not assume that things are inevitable, that they should assume that they should, they can change things, and they can bring, one of the things I would advise them is, AI is not a field that people make it seem so difficult, and you can't get into it, and that's kind of a gatekeeping mechanism. And I think that people can, and I think that we need people with many different perspectives and skills. If you're an artist, if you're a writer, if you're a poet, if you are a social scientist, or you have many other kind of skills or interests, you can still do work in AI and have a important, meaningful contribution. And if you're, somebody interested in math or computer science or engineering or anything like that, you can do that too. And so, it's not a field that you can't join and make a contribution in.
Excellent. Very good advice, Dr. Timnit. Unfortunately, we have to end it here. Thank you very much for giving us the time. In a way, the Erisat's Power of One program was designed with people like you in mind. By that, I mean people who are willing to use their knowledge and expertise to benefit humanity. You made a difference in the lives of the young Ethiopians we mentioned earlier. And that's a good example for all of us to follow, to do what we can with what we have to make things better for everyone. So thank you very much. And I wish you the best with the journey that you have started with DARE. And for our listeners, please check DARE's website and follow Dr. Timnit on Twitter. I'm sure you'll learn a lot. Bye for now. Thank you, Dr. Timnit.
Thank you.